Lost secrets of Melbourne House revealed. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Pinball Lost and Found. We explore Melbourne House's unreleased Arcade Wizzard game for Commodore 64.
Sega's nightmare, the Dreamcast.
Let's buy computers like it's 1998.
And eye-watering Nintendo auction pricing, along with more Batman news, but not any news on the A1200, coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 20th of June, 2026.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Do you hear the vibrance? Do you hear the verve in my voice at this hour when we gather to unite the time zones of the UK, Eastern Australia, Western Australia, and the United States Midwest? There is no good time to do this, my friends.
What time is it where you are just now, Jason?
Not a good time, but a fine time to be with the likes of you. Chris, would you please introduce our guest while I try to energize myself?
Yeah, take him up for the team this time, Jason. So with us this week is Tony, and Tony is from Melbourne House, basically introduced to us by a guy he works with, I believe, called Ed. So, Tony, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and, your history?
So, look, thanks for having me on the show. I suppose long-term nerd is the best way to ever describe myself as. I started very young. My brother and I actually saved up and bought the original Pong and hockey game that you plugged into your TV. So that's where it started, Atari 2600. Then my parents bought a TRS-80 color computer, and then Commodore 64, which is where all the fun began for me. But yes, so look, I suppose my life has always been around IT. I started with gaming at a very early age. So had a friend who I swapped games with and played stuff in. And then one day he just turned around to me and said, "Hey, Tony, when are you actually going to look at how these games work rather than just playing them?" And 16-year-old me just kind of looked at him and went, "Yeah, right." And then a week later, I called him and said, "Okay, you win. How do they work?" And he dropped around a book, Scanlan's book on the 6502 assembly, which I still actually have, and a macro assembler and a monitor program, and said, "There you go. Call me when you have a problem." Didn't end up having a problem. Discovered that these things made sense to me, and yeah, lo and behold, basically started with some interrupt programming and kept going from there, and just fell in love with it. So it was not something I planned on doing. It was more out of curiosity, and it started a very long-term relationship with technology and with the computer game industry over multiple iterations. But I suppose the joy of this whole conversation coming about was a friend of mine, Ed. We started doing some work together several years ago, and we catch up for a beer every so often. And he just turned around to me one day and he was just chatting about the fact he's got, I think, 5 or 6 Amigas and he's got Commodore 64s and that. I'm like, well, what? I didn't know this about you. And then he just dropped the pit of gold, which was, I've actually got a 1541 attached to a PC so I can image discs. And I went, that's really interesting, because when we built our house in 1998, I stuck a box in the roof, and that box was just stuff that I couldn't part with, but I never expected to actually open the box up, except when you move house again, which still hasn't happened. The 5-year plan's in year nearly 30. And so I crawled up into the ceiling, pulled the box down, and I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that there was discs and there was memorabilia from the days at Melbourne House. So on that note, I worked there so I had my dad drop my game off at Melbourne House's office in Tope Street, South Melbourne. It was June of 87. And that afternoon, Fred Milgram called home, and back in the days, the fixed line, and tried to speak to my dad, because that was the guy that dropped the disc off. Ended up having a chat with him, and he quizzed me very heavily technically on a bunch of stuff in relation to interrupts and sprites, other bits and pieces, music and sound. and then offered me a job. And I was 16 doing year 11, and I kind of went, look, I'd like to finish high school. And he said, look, that's not a problem. How about you just work part-time for me and come in, and when you get the chance, like school holidays, you come in full-time. And I thought, well, this is great. I'm such a nerd. I'm already getting hassled at school, so no one knew. It was like today I'd be a rock star if that was the kind of thing I was doing as my day job. Back then, oh no, bad juju ran. So the end result of that was I did it. It was great. But one of the reasons Fred offered me the job wasn't because my game was great. It was because I actually wrote the whole thing in machine code, not even assembly. I actually wrote it literally using hex codes to build the whole thing. So I could see what machine code did, which meant I could reverse engineer stuff. And Fred saw that I could be quite useful in helping to debug problems that were going on, reverse engineering. How did that game actually pull that little trick off? Those kind of things. So that it wasn't because I was a great game writer. It was because I wasn't even slightly concerned about looking at assembly code.
Quick question, because it's going to come up in just a little bit. Is there a difference between Melbourne House and Beam Software? Like the two names exist, and it's occurred to me just now. I haven't really looked into how we got to the two different names.
Look, so Melbourne House was the publishing house. It actually Fred started a book publishing company. So in the office when I was there was this, I don't know, 15-meter long floor-to-ceiling bookshelf that was in one side of the first floor, and it was full of books, and a few of them were actually Melbourne House publishing. So Beam Software was the game entity that was designed so you could publish computer games and, well, to build computer games. Software Licensing and Marketing, or SLM, was actually the company that did the actual publishing. And they're the ones that cut the deals with Mastertronic, US Gold, Mindscape, take your pick on that. The little known fact is that in the mid-'80s, they experimented with a thing called Fitzroy House, which is another suburb in Melbourne. And its job was to produce budget games only. So, and that was, I think, about a 12-month experiment that it worked, but it didn't work well enough. So that one got shut down. But yes, everyone talks Melbourne House. You might as well just squint a bit and it's Beam. They were one and the same as far as I knew.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on the show. We have so much to cover today. We went way over last week. I'm sure this week we're going to manage to fit into the hour, Duncan, I promise. We definitely won't, but we're going to try our best to fit into the hour. And we should get right into it.
Crowdsourced news is the lifeblood of This Week in Retro. It has been for 273 episodes. I'm sure it will be for hundreds more. But when you crowdsource news, as we do from reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro, it can be hard to have exclusive reveals. You know, it would get posted, and frankly, somebody else could do their own podcast with the news before we get there. But courtesy of our guest, Tony Smales, as well as the efforts and coordination of Dr. Ed Young, we are revealing for possibly the first time in any public forum the never-released Melbourne House/Beam Software title for Commodore 64, Arcade Wizzard, an ambitious pinball title which never made it to final production or sale. So, Chris, we talked a little bit about you making the connection with Ed. How did Eastern Australia and Western Australia collaborate to get this story about a lost 1988 8-bit game onto Saturday morning retro television in 2026?
Yeah, well, the short version is Ed emailed me to say he worked with some bloke from Melbourne House who had some discs with unreleased games along with stories to tell, and it would be great to have some exposure for the Australian games development scene, which I totally agree with. As Ed had emailed the address link to my personal YouTube channel, I swiftly replied about 3 months later because I'm terrible at checking that account. That's exactly how we got here.
Send your exclusives elsewhere, please. In late 1988, at least two different editions of Zap magazine, the core UK version as well as the Italian edition, ran short previews of a title called Arcade Wizzard. It was complete with screenshots, some brief notes about gameplay. This game promised to deliver several multi-screen pinball tables spread out across several arcades. Pinball tables with, plausibly lurid names and themes like Harem. Hot Harem, Drag Strip, Mind Dump, Desert Queen, Mob, Vegas, Zipper, Laser Blazer, which is really, really terrible, by the way. These games are in places like the Wonder Dome, Ed's Games, Topspin, Action City, and Manic something. It's cut off on the screen. I can't quite see it.
Manic Miner.
Right. Sure. I was going to say Manic Panic, but gameplay is offered up in what today we would call a career mode, as well as a one-off challenge mode, where you pick a table and you play to beat the house. And in the structure, you can see how video games are evolving here in the late 1980s. There are echoes of multi-sport games like Skate or Die, but there's also this notion of achievements. Playing certain tables well enough unlocks other tables in the game. So, Tony, before we go on too much longer, please fill us in. This was the time that you were working at Melbourne/Beam. Were you connected with the development process at all? What can you tell us about the design and how we got to this mostly complete state on the discs that you and Ed have preserved for us?
Yeah, no problem, Jason. So the answer is yes, I did do a little bit of work on this, but I will say again, I was definitely not the main coder. Beam had a bit of a pigeon pair policy on the way they did a lot of things. And the different versions, so you'd have a 64 version, a Sinclair version, they were generally coded by a different person, but they'd work collaboratively. And you'd share a graphics artist, you would share, I'll call it a storyboarder, and you would share the music and sound effects people. So there were a bunch of people involved. It was actually Bill McIntosh that wrote the Commodore 64 version, and I had the joy of spending some time with Bill on this. Part of the whole legacy, how this came about, was Fred. Fred was very much on trying to push games that were more of an experience, like trying to get things that would, get you coming back. Like, I still remember that phone call with Fred where he made a comment to me saying, no matter how bad things get, parents will give up their drink, they'll give up their cigarettes, but they'll still buy a game for their kids because they want the kids to be happy and quiet. So he really was invested in trying to make games that came through on a repeatability scale. So with Arcade Wizzard, the goal was, can we create something that it was actually, again, as you mentioned, it was more of a campaign-style approach to gaming. It had, the intention was for it to have incrementally more difficult challenges, and the tables were designed to be harder and harder to play. I know you guys have, hopefully you've all had a bit of a tinker with it. The catch is, I don't know if they necessarily got some of that gameplay right. So there's a few technical issues, but under the covers, the game itself was actually technically quite clever. One of the things that Beam did very well was every time they published a game, anything that was good about it was literally put into a library. So when a coder got given when a new job came up and people said, yeah, I'll do that, then they never got dictated to. You don't have to use a particular piece of tech. You don't have to use a particular approach. It was all about the timelines and the end game. So in this particular case, there was another game which was completely, I believe, panned. I don't even know if they've been listed, which was Inspector Gadget. Now, Inspector Gadget game itself was, again, it didn't play at all well. I don't think it even got through the main process. But the underlying engine for animations, character graphic animations, was really, really clever. And the hunk of that ended up in Arcade Wizzard. So there was some interesting parts about that. But yeah, the game itself, it was a case of setting some high, I will call it lofty goals, making it so that it had to take time. You couldn't just fast track to see everything. You had to spend time playing the game to break it open. So there were a couple of design philosophies that worked there.
And it looks like Bill McIntosh has had quite the extensive career. Looks like he was starting out at Melbourne House just a little bit before you were, but he's got credits, just casually glancing at Moby Games, going all the way through 2023. So it looks like he may still be at it.
So yeah, so Bill actually, when he left Beam Software, he founded Taurus. So Taurus Studio here in Australia. They've been very successful. They've produced titles for most platforms over the years, and I believe he's still active. So haven't actually. I bumped into Bill. It would have been around 2000. That's a different story. That was when I co-founded a different game studio. But a few. There was a bunch of the guys from the Beam days, so from that 86 to 89 period. So Trevor Nuridan, Bill McIntosh, Andrew Davey, just to name a few, they all went off after Beam and started their own studios.
Well, Bill, don't take personally what I'm about to say as I recap this game. The game is split across 2 disc sides. It's plausible to imagine how the game might have been put on tape. It would have been fiddly to scan through all the different tables on disc, as well as the individual loads that are associated with some of the interface screens, like going to visit the arcade token vendor. If you're watching video, you may see a bit of that now. It's kind of a full screen graphic. There are big speech bubbles. There is stuff to like in this title. I can see what they're going for in the overworld map, the forced perspective of visiting the closer arcade doors and the size changing character sprites. Inserting the pinball hustler and the arcade token vendor, it gives you that comic book feel. It does come with some disk loading costs, but it's immersive, it's entertaining. The formatting was lacking on this test build. Like, we are clearly looking at a pre-production, probably pre-external testing build here. I have to say, the actual pinball play is pretty poor. I'd already taken a pot shot at Laser Blazer. It's almost impossible to start playing this table. On almost every ball, I had to tilt just to put the ball in play. Otherwise, it would just kind of bounce back down to the plunger. The flick screen approach, you have a little mini map of the table to the right, and there's 3 flick screens of height. It was pretty annoying. On one table that I played, it was all but impossible to get even up to the top sector again. Of the tables I played, there was only one that had like an obviously novel feature, which were these little mini plungers which could trap a ball near the bottom flippers. That was fun. That was interesting. Pinball tables by the late 1980s, different tables were full of these little novel features like this. But on the computer, where a novel feature wouldn't have a material cost to build, the simulations aren't particularly prevalent here in Arcade Wizzard. The game, like I said, obviously not in a fully finished state. There's a short and very repetitive track providing all the music in the game, which I'm told is recycled from something else. The interface element to tell you that you're not cool enough to enter the highest tier arcades isn't implemented. You just see the border flash. And, there are things like dubious ball flipper collision that I'm sure could have been improved. I had at least one swing where the flipper just passed right through the ball, which is never a good sign. Might be a haunting and disintegration. The tables are designed heavily with 90 and 45 degree angles. The bottom drain seems extremely wide. It just didn't feel very polished. And so, Tony, I have to ask, it's not tough to reach the conclusion that this game might have been canceled because somebody with the power to make that decision looked at the gameplay and decided, well, the gap between where we are and where we'd want to be to sell and review well was just too large to close. What do you think?
I know a little bit about the process. So the actual game table designs, they were all prototypes. So they were all put together as a playable, let's actually work at it. The nail in the coffin wasn't the tables, because they could be changed without too much work. The 2 nails that really caught was the flick screen. So the concept of wanted larger graphics, because again, if you look back, I think it was 1983, 1984, David's Midnight Magic was a single screen high-res pinball game, and it was brilliant. It really did a great job. But obviously, it's one table, one screen. It was exceptionally good at what it did. Arcade Wizzard's goal was to provide a whole range of different tables with different feels. One of the things, like you've mentioned, like the plunger captures, there was also ball races. So if you got the ball in the right place, it would actually run through rails to get to another location on the table. So all those kind of mechanics were built into the game. The flick screen was the killer. All of the again, even the internal feedback, it was too difficult to keep your eye on the ball, so to speak. Like the mini map on the side, it was great, but you couldn't play off it, and the game itself. The other thing, again, yes, definitely what you're looking at is a pre-production release. I'll guarantee that, because the reason it got sent to me was because I was trying to track down a couple of bugs in relation to one. I don't even know if you notice it. The original splash screen with Arcade Wizzard on it, it's actually out by 64 bytes. It was actually the build rate of compression routine to actually reduce the size of that was stored, and then it was uncompressed. But if you look, the actual very end part of the shadowing on the word wizard, it's actually on the start of the next row. So there's just things like that where they're telltales of how far through the actual game was. But again, I suppose I look at the game, I look at where it got to. The music was a placeholder because the music gets replaced. The table landscapes, again, they were playing, but obviously people who did the design never played pinball because I'm a bit of a pinball addict, to be blunt. So I love the concept of pinball. But yeah, there was just a few things that couldn't be emulated properly. And again, anyone that knows a 64, like there's no floating point. Like anytime you try and do physics, you're facing an uphill battle. And things like the flippers being a set of animations, you're going to have to run a ball at high speed through a progression without it being visible so you can intercept those flipper events. Otherwise, yes, you go straight through something. Like there are just nuances that would have been worked out, but obviously I don't know why it was cancelled. I don't know why the end result was it became an unpublished title. Two theories. One, they just decided it was a bridge too far to take it from where it currently was to being a commercial product. The other one would be that in order to try and change it so that it was a scrolling game to achieve a vertical scroll with I suppose the mini table on the side, it's currently it was a technical impossibility. You'd have to re-architect the entire screen in order to actually make it fit as a scrolling game. And as soon as you start scrolling any kind of size, you start losing a lot of cycle time. So those physics would have to be reduced, and the animations also would suffer. So there's a whole bunch of trade-offs that would have had to have come into play. So again, ambitious project, content-driven, and at some point in time, just someone made a call, whether it was a publisher or whether it was Fred, I couldn't tell you.
You guys, you watched a little bit of the gameplay video. What do you think?
I really like the concept and the sort of going in between the different arcades. It feels like a pinball culture simulator rather than just a pinball game simulator. For me, the best way I can explain it, maybe to myself or to others, is it feels like Need for Speed, but for pinball machines and arcades. And I really like that approach. It is a shame, as has already been discussed, that it's the screen flip rather than a scroll. But, it's a Commodore 64. I'm thinking about it, what's your competition at this? Is it just Codemasters Pinball Simulator that you're competing with at this point?
Yeah, there's a few. Dave, what do you think?
I'm gonna bat for this game. I was really impressed with the general idea of it. We have to remember what period in time it was. This is what games were turning into. This whole idea of playing a career in the game, of having much more to it than just the gameplay. So I think this would have captured my imagination and I would have played it lots. When I think of the amount of time I spent playing Ghostbusters, which was a really simple game. When you look at the actual gameplay in Ghostbusters, there's not much to it, but the whole career mode of that made it compelling enough to play. So I think this could have done really well if they had spent the time to polish it and finish it off. Even with the flip screen scrolling. I mean, this isn't... Pinball for me peaked in the kind of early 90s with things like Indiana Jones, the Addams Family and so on. And this is before then. So this is before you had that to compare it to in the arcades and say, look, this isn't the same as that. So this could have done... I think this could have done really well. It could have been a game to play for a long time if they'd managed to get people to play it and to polish off what was there. So, yeah, I like what they were trying to do.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm thinking my favourite games were Fishtails, Addams Family, and Star Trek Next Generation. And again, I think it was ambitious. It was designed to try and capture people for a long period of time, rather than just for the adrenaline hit. I'm going to play a game for half an hour or an hour, and then I'm going to put it down. this was the kind of game design that they were trying to put into play.
Yeah, it's weird that pinball on the C64 is surprisingly kind of a wasteland in the commercial heyday.
You would think if the Commodore 64 can do shoot 'em up so well, why can't it do pinball?
And this kind of ties into, as Tony mentioned, David's Midnight Magic was an early title on the C64, Night Mission Pinball, Pinball Construction Set. And what these all have in common is they're all solidly playable, but they're also pretty basic ports from the Apple II original, and they look and feel that way. And so this is the time when, for whatever reason it's taken this long, you're starting to see people say, okay, what if we program this for the C64 and use its strengths? And we didn't get there with this. Chris, I think you mentioned that Advanced Pinball Simulator, that's going to come out, right around when this game was scheduled to be released. We get Mastertronic 3D Pinball a little bit later, which is, it's not insultingly bad, but neither is it especially good. Yeah, it does seem like it shouldn't have been quite so hard to put together a sharp pinball machine on a sharp pinball game on a machine that, yes, it doesn't have not great at advanced math. You have to do a lot of work on the 6510, but those routines are out there, and you've got a lot of flexible graphical capabilities. And I know that things like Pinball Construction Set, adapting the Apple II, throw bits at the hardware until it puts graphics on the screen, did make it pretty easy to do things like multi-ball, which if it was in Arcade Wizzard, I didn't find it in any of the tables while preparing the story. But was the best of all is that Tony had this disc, which has been missing from sites like Games That Weren't for all these years. Games That Weren't has an article that up until very recently listed this as a 1 of 5 score of findability because it wasn't out there. It didn't even know who the coder was. Tony's filled in that gap. This has all changed, right? Tell us about the fate of Arcade Wizzard as of this episode coming out, and anything else that you found from your Melbourne House days. And do you know of other games which were canceled at this fairly advanced stage?
As I said, the Arcade Wizzard was just an absolute gem of a find because I had the discs that I got sent to try and do debugging on. So that was a bit of gold. The other thing that was in the box was an actual an Australian release preview of Aussie games, which again did get released in a couple of places, but there's other bits on that we can go into. The one that I'm actually that I suppose for me personally was the game I actually sold to Software Licensing and Marketing, which was Void. That was a game that never got released, and again. Again, working with, I suppose, Frank, and I have to thank Neil for putting me onto Frank in that construct. I didn't realize how big the retro movement had become. Like, as I said, this was a part of my life from almost 40 years ago. And it was fun. I got some great memories, but suddenly it suddenly comes to life. And now I'm like, okay, there's a bunch of names everyone knows. If I look at some of the sites, I actually get to see who's been credited with what, and people like Phil Mitchell. He was actually one of the first people I spoke to. Greg Barnett, same. But there were a bunch of guys like me. They used to do a annual internship where they would get people from completing the computer science or computer engineering degrees out of the unis in Melbourne. And you could apply to basically do a test. And you'd sit the test, and then they'd hire 3 for the school holiday period. So you'd get to work for them for 10 to 12 weeks full time. And a couple of the guys that were in that, I actually still have contact with. Not because of the gaming industry, just because one ended up becoming a patent lawyer and other bits and pieces. So in my professional life, I've still got contact. So I've now reached out to them going, hey, there were some titles that I know we're working on, and if I start digging, I'm not seeing them anywhere. I thought, I just wonder if the luck might continue, if I can actually find some of these guys and say, okay, do you have something in your garage? Because if you do, I know a way to get it out there. But because in my mind, there's a period of 6 months where Software Licensing and Marketing was being sold to Mastertronic. And pretty much from what I can gather, every title that was in the ready-to-be-published state, that transfer from Software Licensing and Marketing to Mastertronic, nothing got published. When Mastertronic ran, they didn't bother with any of the stuff that was on that catalog. And I think part of it was because 8-bit was starting to tire. Amiga, that kind of like some of the early consoles and that were starting to come into life. And they kind of went, it's too much of a gamble to do a whole bunch of tape releases. We'll drop them. So my expectation is there's probably half a dozen titles that were in various states of completion that probably never saw the light of day. And I won't pre-step, but let's just say there's possibility that some other stuff might crop up. I did check the other boxes in the ceiling because I did get sent bits and pieces over my time that I was there. But unfortunately, I don't know where they've gone. I've only got the one box, and it just had the 3 titles in it.
Yeah, I really amazing this find, but I just can't. I just think this could have done it. The whole idea of playing a game that was more than just the basic gameplay was really starting to catch on at this point. Clear that you had the ideas in this were well ahead of the time. Achievements, unlocking things, all the rest of it. I can't think of a game where it was quite as much as this going on from that time. So yeah, this game was clearly ahead of its time. Shame it didn't make it out, although I say that, but because it didn't make it out, I can always argue it was going to be a great success. Maybe it would have been an absolute stinker if it got out. Maybe the gameplay as it wasn't enough to carry it, and so maybe it would have been a shame had it got out.
I did laugh at the Zap article that obviously I got pointed at, and again, I love Zap. I reckon I owned every copy I imported from the UK, and just the commentary about it's not looking good is the effective commentary on it, and you sit there going, like at the end of the day, those early stages, pretty much every game I've ever seen, up until what I call the 80% point, especially back in the 8-bit days, looked like a dog's breakfast right up until suddenly you got the character maps in place, you got the music and sound effects in place. It was like you'd worked a year on a technical prototype, and that was how a lot of things came together.
Yeah, I didn't take a look at the pinball game, knowing that Jason had given me some footage to look at, so I looked at that first. But I did poke around on some of the other discs, and I did have a go at Belly Flop, which I thought was just hilarious. Right? I mean, these are Aussie games, so it's a diving competition. Only the whole premise is the best belly flop gets the most points, from what I could work out. Fantastic, and I did have a look at Void, so it's interesting to hear that was your sort of, I guess, your demo piece, was it?
Cool. So with Aussie Games, Aussie Games was another one of we'll call it Beam's ideas, where they'd seen the success of Epics, Summer Games 2, Winter Games, and then California Games, and off that, Fred went, okay, let's do an Australian version. And again, this was a game that was written by, I think there were about 5 programmers involved, because each of the games, it was, again, the whole concept was there's half a dozen games. You run it as a competition. It supported multiple players, and some of it was competitive. You could actually go head to head. Some of it was solo work, and you had to take turns. But it was an interesting set of ideas. So you had things like big game fishing. You had belly flop. You had a we'll call it a canoe race, but it was in the middle of Australia, so it was you carry the canoe rather than you actually get to be in the water for it. Like, some very Australian concepts. The how I got involved. So I didn't write any of the games. So all the mini games are written by other people. But all right, I'm about to misquote his name, and I don't want to do that. Bruce Bailey. So Bruce Bailey, he actually wrote the big game fishing. But he moved on just before it was completed, and it had a bug in it. So when you tried to do the fishing, when you tried to do your cast launch, the little launch meter down the bottom, every so often it would just go all the way up to the top and wrap back around, and then it would launch. And so I got sent a copy of the game saying, hey, Tony, can you see if you can work out why it does this? And that's how I ended up with this 4-disc copy of the game. And And again, so yeah, worked to get the bugs fixed. The interesting part, and again, this could just be me misremembering things, but when I first saw the game in the studio itself, which would have been maybe up to 6 months prior to me getting that copy, Belly Flop didn't exist in this Commodore 64 version. It was a beer drinking game. Now, the US, being the target, obviously they have very strict alcohol laws for children. And my guess would be the publisher, because eventually I believe it was US Gold that did the release on it. The publisher went, if you want to get the American market, you're going to actually have to drop that and put something else in place. So Belly Flop wasn't the original game that was going to go into that. As I said, I could be completely misremembering because it's a very long time ago, and I could be hallucinating, to use a modern AI terminology. But the key here is the game. It was a bunch of different guys that were involved in it. It was a long-term project. Like a lot of games back in the 80s, 85 to 87, 88, they generally, it was a 3 to 6 month run. But some of these games actually were 12, 18 months between inception planning to actually having something to look at.
Tony, I have to wrap this story or everybody's going to be mad at me.
We'll try to get
some of the
over.
Aussie Games history in there, yeah.
The normal 15 minutes per story has gone to 40.
Yeah.
Apologies.
No,
it's all fascinating. Yeah, I think there's a lot more here that we haven't managed to get in. There's a lot more to tell here. Plus the potential, you've hinted at it, but you've not said it. You've hinted that there's more than Arcade Wizzard that you've found to come out. Yeah.
Indeed. So there are other games. As I said, Void, my one, I'm quite happy to have that published. But yeah, there's a couple that I'm going to try and track down and see if they still exist. Is any of the people that I know have a copy? Again, put it in the 1% category.
So really exciting that we were able to help bring this lost effort to light. And even without documentation, Arcade Wizzard it's easy enough to load and explore. I will be interested to see if people discovered buried key presses or other quirky gameplay strategies which help unlock some of the fun. And hey, when you're done watching This Week in Retro or listening, however you consume your content, head over to Games That Weren't, where there is now an updated Arcade Wizzard page, including lots of new insights that were not available until Tony and Ed worked together, got Chris involved, got us involved. Thank you so much for all of that. And if you out there have any old discs quietly gathering dust in a corner or up in your attic, please image and preserve them. Like Tony, you may have something the world has been looking for over 37 years.
We are sponsored this week, thank you very much, by PCBWay.com. PCBWay.com do all sorts of things, not just PCBs. They will do CNC milling, they'll do 3D printing, as they did for me, which you'll see in a future sponsor slot. But one of the things that we like about PCBWay is their shared project feature, where they have a library where you can go and look at what other people have designed and said, well, maybe someone else might like to do this. It's a fantastic thing if you want to do something simple for your first little project. You can go and get them to print a little PCB for you and finish it off yourself, or design things yourself, get things changed on what's there already. We like to browse through what's there. Jason, have you browsed through this week? What have you found?
Yeah, it's a platform where you can collaborate on designs. You can converse with the designer if they're open to that, upvote, downvote, all that good stuff. And there's some interesting projects this time around. The Sesame Distro Board version 3. This is a powerful open source development board built around the ESP32S3 microcontroller. It is designed to provide output to up to 8 servo motors simultaneously, making it ideal for robotics and motion control projects. Also, a really cool looking device here. It is a USB business card badge. It features a native USB plug-in as well as a capacitive touch features. So really cool little project if you want to kind of go back to the days of yore where you'd walk around with tech and be really unique, say 25 years ago. Nice little feature. And the Game Boy Enhance motherboard. So this is a circuit recreation of the original Game Boy Advance, but using modern hardware to augment the original system. So you harvest the CPU and RAM from an original GBA, but out of this you get better audio clarity, you get much lower power draw, It's got options to power both through the traditional AA batteries or a more modern rechargeable. Really interesting if you are interested in updating your old GBA experience. This and many more shared projects on PCBWay.com.
Thank you for sponsoring us. If you want to sponsor an upcoming episode of This Week in Retro, then write to us at TWIR, so Twitter, at thisweekinretro.com for details. If you look at gaming in the first half of the 90s and you look past the spectacular, groundbreaking things that were happening on PC, ST, and Amiga, and past the arcades, which were still the cutting edge of gaming, then you'd be looking at the biggest gaming phenomenon ever. Following the success of the 8-bit consoles, both Nintendo and Sega were enjoying massive success with the SNES and the Mega Drive, or its biggest market, the Genesis. These consoles were special at the time, and in fact, they're still very special now. When we look back at games, well, sometimes we need context for them to be worth playing. Sometimes we need a little bit of an explanation. This is the most the computer could do. It couldn't really do that. You don't really need that for these 16-bit console games. I think most of them you can pick up and play, and they're just as good. It's all very well for me to go on about how good Ultima 4 is, but I don't think with complete honesty that I could say it's aged well enough for someone who is 20 years old now to say, here's a role-playing game, play this instead of Skyrim. But if we go back to Sonic the Hedgehog, for example, it's just good. It was good back then and it's good now. And it's very evident if you look at the news articles submitted to our subreddit over the years. Time and time again, we read about people who are too young to have been around the first time, but they love playing their SNES and Mega Drive games because these games don't have their nonsense that modern games have. You plug in your cart, you play the game, and none of that modern rubbish with game currency and nagging to go online and all the rest of it. And if you look back to these SNES and Mega Drive games, they are still good now. And there's a vibrant handheld emulation selection out there to play these games. And loads of people play these games on emulators or on Mister or even get the original hardware. So that's the early to mid-90s. Fantastic consoles and fantastic games. But we all know that Sega struggled. And that's where today's submission comes in. Squelch411 links us to a Crazy Ken video on the Dreamcast, Sega's last console, and a commercial failure. Ken talks through in a fantastic video. I think if you wiped all the content out about the Dreamcast on the internet, then this would be the one thing to preserve. It has everything in it, I think. Much more detail than I heard before. Lots of things I learned watching this video. He said that essentially the follow-up to the Mega Drive, the Saturn, was a modest success, but nothing like the success of the Mega Drive. And then the Dreamcast was this weird enigma, commercially a failure, never quite doing the numbers it needed, but still selling 10 million units in its life. The games and the community for the Dreamcast were not a failure. It ended up being a very well-loved console and one where the community is more active now than ever. The video is a very fond video on the Dreamcast. Clearly, Ken loves the Dreamcast, but also it's honest. It tells the truth in it. I really enjoyed watching it. Ultimately, I think the Dreamcast failed because the PlayStation 2 was such a good offering. I think the Dreamcast, and Ken says this, it did okay numbers, not quite good enough in its first year. And then the PlayStation 2 came out, and, well, why would you buy the Dreamcast when you can get the PlayStation 2? The Dreamcast beat the PlayStation 2 to market in the US and Europe by about a year, about 18 months in Japan. But when the PS2 could do DVD, and unlike the Saturn, the PlayStation 2's predecessor, the PS1, was a huge rip-roaring success. The PS2 sold on the back of that, where the Dreamcast didn't sell on the back of the Saturn. But Ken highlights one unique thing about the Dreamcast that I learned. It takes us to how we got where we are today with the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast supported a niche and unsuccessful CD format for interactive music CDs and a hack involving that music format allowed you to run your own code on the Dreamcast, which meant that you could use pirate games on the Dreamcast. So this was the hack that allows you to use pirate games, and where pirate goes, homebrew follows. And that's why there's a vibrant homebrew and conversion scene for the Dreamcast today, because of this little music CD. There's so much in this video to talk about, but it's absolutely fascinating. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that if you needed one thing to just kind of take you through the Dreamcast story from beginning to end, this is a pretty good video to do that. I think it maybe missed a little bit on the fact that it seemed that it was an easy console to do third-party hardware for as well. Like when I was getting mine, it was really easy to come up with adapters for other game console controllers and keyboards and things like that. People came up with new Ethernet adapters for it. So it seems like it was, intentionally or not, pretty extensible. And he does touch on what I think ultimately was the biggest factor in its lack of success, which is that it didn't deliver on basics that the market had already made it clear that were going to be necessary for success. It did not have name brand sports games. It did not have the EA franchises that EA had spent basically all of the 1990s building up into, hey, this is the de facto sports game experience. That was a big, big hole to dig out of. And whether it was a direct response to that or just the decision Sega was making, they leaned really hard into novelty games, maracas and fishing controllers and stuff like that, instead of saying, how about we work harder on giving you the gameplay experiences you've made clear you want? It's not impossible to win a generation as a kitschy developer. Nintendo did it with the Wii, but I think that's harder than just giving people what they've told you they want. I loved my Dreamcast, but I also unapologetically acknowledge that I only bought it when they slashed the price, because that's what it needed to budge me, who was a pretty computer-oriented and casual gamer, off of what I had at the time, which was my computers and the original PlayStation and a Sega Nomad. Sure, you want to give me a console that there's homebrew and pirate stuff for $50, I'll take that, but I wasn't going to get it for $200 or more.
The Sega had, and Ken says this in the video, Sega had brought in a sports developer who weren't EA, and EA said, we'll develop games for your Dreamcast, but we need to be the exclusive place on it. So Sega, with hindsight, it's easy to say, but Sega just said, okay, how about we restrict our part to the fishing and the maracas, and you do the football and the football. Chris, what did you think?
I don't remember anybody that I knew ever having a Dreamcast, but correct me if I'm wrong, didn't it have was it a built-in modem or a built-in network? A built-in modem.
Yep.
Right.
Not just that, but it was modular. You could take it out and stick something else in its place, a broadband adapter instead of the modem. It was really far ahead of its time that way.
Because the weird thing is, and I don't know why this is stuck in my head, but I do remember reading somewhere about, and this must have been after the price had dropped and you could pick them up for next to nothing, but reading a story about how hackers were using them as back doors because it was cheap enough they could run their code on it and they could just leave it in an office building as a backdoor device plugged into the network, and then off they go. They just dial into that from outside. So there we go. I don't ever recall playing on one, but I did play on the Saturn, and I thought the Saturn was fantastic, especially for Daytona.
Tony, did you ever have a Dreamcast?
No, look, I didn't get into consoles until Xbox One, the original. But I was a really big Amiga person, so Amiga was I suppose my platform of choice for a lot of that era of gaming. But again, I suppose touching on just a lot of my friends had consoles, I found them interesting. The bit that I suppose I learned during my game development days is that not always the best piece of hardware wins the race. Like in the 6502 family series, there's actually the Game Boy was 6502, the NES was 6502. There was another thing called the PC Engine. Now the PC Engine rocked. As far as a piece of equipment, that blew everything else to pieces, but it just didn't get the commercial traction. And I think, again, just looking back, because I suppose I've done work with Nintendo with the good old Dolphin back when it was first released. I suppose a recurring theme is it's how savvy are your commercials, how good is your actual catalog, not just what you've currently got, but what you can get coming down. And PlayStation just seemed to monster that. They really knew how to create the fear of missing out I've got this game. If you haven't got this particular console, you're never going to be able to get this game, and all your friends are raving about it. So I think, again, if I look back, and I've played a bunch of Dreamcast games, like I've got, I think, every emulator ever created. I love looking at some of the old stuff and how it was all put together. But again, the games are great. The gameplay is great. Sega had a massive, Daytona, their arcade version. I think that's still in places. You go to a pub and it's still in the corner. Like, it's just got so much longevity about it. But unfortunately, it's a blip. They didn't manage to take the advantages that they got and keep going with them. So yeah, there's been a few names over the time that have just, like, take Atari Lynx, another great example of a great piece of hardware that just did not get anywhere. So it's, I feel sorry for it, because again, Sega, they had some great content, but look, I suppose some of their concepts will live on forever. And you never know in this day and age of trademark rebranding. You might see a new Sega pop up at some point in time, and everyone will go, "Hey, I want that."
Yeah, well, following this, Sega turned into a third-party developer and turned their fortunes around. They were losing money year on year on year, and then they turned it around when they left the hardware market. But also reported in this subreddit this week is that they're returning to hardware. Well, not really. Not really. It's only a handheld, and it's just a rumour. Supposedly a low-cost ARM-based device, so system on a chip, cheap device with low internal storage, but interestingly enough, using cartridges is what they are supposedly rumoured to be doing. So I guess this would be the Evercade type thing that they'd be looking at doing, that kind of idea where you get a package of games you stick in the back of it and play them. I presume. We don't know yet, but I imagine you get your handheld and you've got the Sonic Collection 1 you stick in the back.
That's really interesting to hear, because like, I look at my kids. So I got 3 kids. My youngest will be turning 18 in a few months. They're into instant. Like, they want now. And even with the consoles, like, every time I watch my kids play the new Xbox game, they play it for a day. Next time they turn it on, they've got to download an 80 gig update. It's a continuous flow. That cartridge mentality gives you instant. You plug it in, you turn it on, it works. It's like the good old GBA days and everything else. They just worked. So that, in my mind, there's a whole market there that they're potentially trying to tap into. If that's real, like, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, it's a booming market. There's a whole lot of interest in it, and it's for the reasons you said. It's because if you take a Mega Drive game and you turn it on, you're playing right away. You're playing in seconds, whereas you've got an Xbox thing or modern PlayStation game you're downloading for the ages. So I guess that's why people returning to, your kids who have never played these games might return to the 16-bit console era and play these games, and of course, possibly Dreamcast as well. But anyway, thank you for submitting that to subreddit Squelch, and what a fantastic video, Ken. I'd like to welcome on 2 new patrons this week. So welcome on Bobster and Retro Arcade Man. Thank you very much for signing up to become official twirlers and supporting us that way. If you'd like to join them, if you'd like to become an official twirler, if you'd like to get access to the patron benefits that we have, the extra videos and so on, then where would you go, Chris?
Patreon.com/This Week in Retro.
Boom. Couple of quick corrections from last week's episode. Over on Bluesky, account The Teletext Archaeologist corrected us. The Quazon terminal that guest Jason Timmons showed off on last week's episode is for the view data two-way format. It is not a classic teletext terminal. Fortunately, that account is run by yet another Jason, so this correction has been kept in the Jason family. And Richard James 13 over on YouTube clarified for us that the large VIC-20 expansion cage that we were struggling to remember was codenamed the VIC-1020. We misremembered the product number. If you'd like to submit stories for things like news and brief coming up, please head over to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro, where you can post stories, upvote, downvote, comment, and basically find things to keep us busy.
On to news and briefs this week. Mike C76 links us to a story about ChatGPT losing a chess match to an Atari 2600. We did cover this about a year ago, I think, or maybe more than that. Chris, you covered it, I think.
I did. Maybe it lost again. I don't know.
It's one of these stories that's resurfaced and then gone round all the news things because people want to cheer on the Atari 2600 against this horrible AI that's ruining everything.
But the 2600 will always beat ChatGPT. So, because the AIs, they're using trained information to generate this mathematical, multi-dimensional space that it just numbers, it matches. Whereas the Atari 2600, that chess program had a breadth-first search technique, which allowed it to literally try every move. Like if you put it into the hardest mode, it would take upwards of 8 hours to make a move. And that's just because it's going, if I move this, what's going on? And it checks all the patterns. So because it has the ability to actually do it in an algorithmic sense, it's always going to beat something that's just utilizing generic knowledge that it's captured across all of humanity. Like it's just not going to get there unless they've got a very specific trained one that can reach out and actually do things in a deterministic manner.
Yeah, and I think that was the point of the original article. It was, ChatGPT didn't have a clue what it was doing.
It never does.
No.
There were a couple of fun operating system stories this week. In a story that was reported on Hackaday, submitted to us by Rich2600, we learned about GentleOS, which is a new hobbyist graphical operating system for very old PCs. Minimum spec is a 386 processor, 4 megs of RAM, and 640 by 480 by 16 color VGA. Hardware support is pretty limited to the basics: keyboard, your choice of PS2 or serial mouse, and PC speaker. There is a 16-bit version for even lower spec machines. It's unclear if it's as powerful as, say, Windows 3.1 or OS 2, but it does look like the kind of thing you would have been happy enough if it shipped on your PC in 1991 or so and you wanted a break from DOS. And in another OS story, Amores is at it again, bashing out-of-date hardware support into modern Windows builds. He shared with us his latest video, which is forcing Windows 11 to boot on an Intel Core Duo 2 motherboard with classic DDR1 memory and an AGP 8X graphics slot. Apparently, Microsoft tried to cut off support for AGP graphics a full decade ago, but Amores has extracted the support from old Windows 10 builds and jammed it into Windows 11.
Nice. Can you do the same for Firewire? Thanks to Dr. Local for linking us to Retro Games Limited's latest video drop regarding the A1200. And no, sorry, we're not covering it. Nothing against Dr. Local. Why? Well, because I don't understand why the internet has gone nuts over this drop. It shows nothing of interest. It was dropped on the Retro Games Limited Facebook page and has made its way to various online tech news outlets, YouTubers, podcasts, and the like. But what's shown, well, it's still the prototype mold, not the retail product. And I'm not sure if this one even has a working keyboard yet. The keys are not two-tone. The keyboard backplate is also white. There's no markings on the keys that I can see. So this is basically a software demo then. Well, it's the same carousel we've always seen, and it's a bunch of A500 OCS games getting played. So unless I'm missing an AGA version in there, I didn't see anything that was A1200 specific, and they don't show Workbench, which is really what everybody is after at this point. However, the video does end with the person behind the camera selecting Workbench mode before the video cuts out. So I think that's probably an intentional teaser, and I'd assume it will lead into the next video drop, maybe. And I say this as someone who openly likes Retro Game Limited's products and often fights people on the internets because, people like to give RGL crap for no reason. But no, I didn't find this drop interesting in the slightest because while I'm sure work has gone on behind the scenes, heck, this could have been running off a off-camera A500 Mini for all we know. So we'll cover it in detail when they show something exciting, which I'm sure they eventually will.
Well, Chris is off his soapbox then. When is retrobrighting not retrobrighting? Well, it turns out when it's in a spray bottle from AliExpress. The Retro channel covers this in a video with results that in no way surprise me at all. I won't spoil it. You'd have to watch the video to find out, although I did thoroughly enjoy the video regardless of the outcome. So thank you to Starcade 2084 for that one.
And a sealed Super Mario Brothers cartridge has sold for $3 million American dollars by Heritage Auctions, according to Squelch411, submitting us a story reported on The Verge. This is the earliest known sealed version, comes with a nice glossy sticker, and that's what you paid $3 million American for.
And in an update to the Batman story from last week, the new Lego Batman game has some code appearing on a screen in-game. It looks a little bit like C64 Basic, and right enough, if you put it into a C64, you get a yellow Batman sprite moving on the screen like a DVD screensaver. Thanks, Squelch411, for letting us know about that one.
If there's anything that takes your fancy you want us to talk about, then submit it to the subreddit at reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro, and thank you to everyone who does.
In the 80s, the BBC were well known for having supported the UK's march into the technology revolution. It was a genius stroke in pairing a computer contract for schools with home TV programming to educate the masses on what computers were and how to use them. And it worked. Or did it? As it seems, we still needed help as late as the late 1990s, apparently. And not just in how to use computers, but how to buy them. We touched on this video drop from the BBC archives as shared with us by Dr. Local in News in Briefs last week, but now I've actually watched it. And before we get into this, to be fair, let's just say that everything should be viewed in the context of the time, and the video, which is from the BBC's Computers Don't Bite campaign from 1998, was clearly not aimed at people like us, people who grew up loading games from cassette, if not coding them from magazine listings, and have kept up with the ever-changing trends since then. No, this is clearly aimed at the average British family not knowing why they need a computer in the home, and if they do, which one to buy. And let's be honest, if you don't know, you don't know. What is a processor? What is RAM? What spec do I need? Why is this one more expensive than that one? Do I buy from a shop or from a magazine? And I feel the video did address those subjects quite well. What's your feeling, guys? Actually, just in brief, what are your feelings? And before I get into everything else, was this video useful for non-tech nerds?
I don't know how useful it was. I think it was more of a look how confusing buying a PC is, and look at this family who haven't got a clue trying to buy something that now they feel the world is leaving them behind if they don't own this, and they hope it's just like going in to buy a microwave, but it's not like just going in to buy a microwave.
All right, and I know this isn't just the earliness of the hour and my flagging energy and crabbiness talking. You guys on this show talk about the computer literacy project like it was the greatest technocultural achievement since the aqueduct. So I want to know why 15 years later, the BBC still has to tell people how to buy a computer. Wasn't this problem solved? Wouldn't these grown-ups now, wouldn't they have been watching all those things and having their BBC micros and understanding all of this? Maybe the computer literacy project was not, in fact, the greatest technocultural achievement of all time. Maybe you guys have been wrong about that if we still have to do this.
Taking your not quite sincere attack there, what the problem was that we had British computers, which are fantastic, and they lost out to American computers. And it's American computers that the confusion is about. If American computers were any good, this wouldn't be necessary.
Wasn't Amstrad still in the market?
I know.
Check and mate.
If only we'd been the Archimedes.
It's interesting because I'm thinking back, Tandy. So Tandy did
1000.
Well, Tandy was the Tandy 1000 was the earliest stage, and then their color computer, and they depended on magazine advertising for a long time, and they actually started the concept of creating color computer clubs. So these were public clubs run in halls where it was color computer. And at the time, it was amazing because it was basically Tandy TRS-80 color computer was the only color computer that was out there. Like in Australia, that it wasn't a great market pool, but it worked. It actually got people in. But it also meant that they got to control the narrative when people suddenly got, okay, well, I'm going to get myself a PC. And they got to control the direction in which people went and looked. So it was a really interesting undertaking that used people rather than a pure advertising approach to make it less scary. And of course, the guy up the front that was actually a Tandy employee, I got to know him quite well. His name was Ken. He was actually really good because he also worked at a PC shop not just at Tandy. So when it came down to you wanting to buy a PC, he could suddenly put together a $2,500 PC. Remember, this is the 80s. Well, that's a lot of money. And you'd get, maybe 16 meg of RAM and a 386 maths coprocessor if you're lucky. So it was an interesting time. But yeah, most people I know, they got a computer, they had no idea what they were buying.
So I think we're in agreement. This video is probably not aimed at people like us, tech nerds. We did know these things back then. By 1998, I would have been rocking my P200 MMX with, I think, 48 meg of RAM, a 1.4 or 1.8 gig Quantum Fireball, and a 60 meg 3DFX Banshee card. And that same computer had started life as a P100 with 16 meg of RAM and a 1 megabyte SVGA card. And I'd done all the upgrades myself. So this video is not aimed at me, which is why I could laugh at it and laugh my head off. I did. It's filmed wonderfully, often at 45-degree angles, with an over-animated presenter, Dave Green, frequently being made to look like he's talking to you from a web page or a PC screen. There are some comedy gold bits of advice and other bits you could easily miss. Like how one family, the Lines family, after commenting how expensive buying a computer can be, drives off to the shops to buy their first one in their brand new 4.2-litre V8 Jaguar XJ8 Sovereign in full luxury trim. This TV spot clearly aimed at the average working-class British family in true BBC style then. So precious is their Jag that on purchasing their first computer and all the boxes that went with it at the store, they drive home with the boot open and all the boxes of PC gear sticking out the back because God forbid you put those boxes on the leather rear seats. Co-presenter Sue Davis, reminding me very much of a toned-down version of Violet Berlin from Bad Influence. At one point, she refers to the box of the Tower PC as the processor, but other than that, comes across as quite knowledgeable, helpful, and level-headed. My favourite bit of advice from David Green, though, is that before you buy a computer, wait for it, you just spend a couple of weeks reading magazines. Nice. The Plumbers family, that wasn't their vocation, that was their name. They chose to buy directly from the manufacturer via a magazine advert. They did quite well, only spending a couple of hours working out how to plug it in. Did they look at the diagram? No. They sat down to watch a tutorial video on VHS, having to pause and rewind as they did so. Later, apparently, they froze the system playing solitaire. Did they turn the machine off and on again after thumping the caps lock key a few times for signs of life in the caps light? Or did they even try Control-Alt-Delete? Hell no! They called the support line, and after 3 calls and waiting on hold, they apparently were told that the computers do in fact have a problem with the game Solitaire. So, yep, they've purchased, apparently for just under £1,000, a Windows 95 Pentium 200 4-gig hard drive with 32 meg of RAM, and it has known issues with Solitaire. The manufacturer isn't actually revealed on that machine. I don't know if that was to protect them from Jason, I think you spotted something in the video, though?
Yeah, I thought I could see on the box that it said PC Connect, which if that resonates as a... Yeah,
maybe. I did try and zoom in and I couldn't quite make out. It's not a brand I knew from the time anyway. But the BBC are very good at not trying to promote any certain product. When they rang the support line, they would talk through how to turn the machine off and on again. And it sounds like they're also subjected to a full check disk on startup. So that's nice. TV program asked each family what they will use the computer for. And the answers included things like coursework, homework, doing the home accounts, designing the garden, and denying it's going to be for games. And look, we can laugh it off, right? But for me, my P200 started as a P100, and the P3 that followed it, I taught myself how to build web pages, 3D modeling and animation, how to use Flash and the accompanying software around that, and video editing. And Nikki, my wife, she used it to do the accounts and learn how to drift a Porsche in the snow in Screamer 2 and run over zombies in Carmageddon. So now I welcome from you guys more on what you found funny about this video, but also, how did you research what to buy back then, and what were you running around this period, and what did you use it for besides games? Tony?
I suppose I cut back a little bit earlier. So what I found funny was I was waiting for John Cleese to turn up at some point. Like, it just seemed highly appropriate we could have a ministry of computer education or something that would fit in very well. I love that era. People they took themselves so seriously when they were doing that kind of work. So, but yeah, my dad bought an XT in the probably mid-86 at a guess, and he was kind of horrified when he came home and I actually disassembled it because I was kind of curious as to what was inside the box, not just what was X. It was different to my Commodore 64, which you had to unscrew the cover and everything was all sitting there. So for me, when I started getting interested in computers, I couldn't count how many different computers I've had, but those ones from, we'll call it 89, 89 was an interesting year. I bought an Amiga 1000 off Phil Mitchell from Beam. So I actually bought his Amiga 1000, but then I got the sidecar. So I was one of the few people that had that combination, and I actually had an expansion unit that went on I called it the Caterpillar, actually gave me, I think it was an extra 512K of RAM. So I had a really great system, and my big regret is I sold it, as I've done with all my machines. I have none of my old machines. But I suppose that era of you looked at a computer, and when you looked at it, you spoke to people, you went to the shop, you chatted to people, but it really was a mission because the motherboard, you're looking at it not just for now, you're looking at it for the next 3 to 4 years going, will it support expansions? Will it support new cards coming out? Like my pride and joy moment was I actually managed to get an ASUS V999 Ultimate card. Like that was at the time the best graphics card you could possibly get. The catch was the next generation of hardware turned up, it was incompatible, and you're back there. Like those days were different, but again, to a certain extent, a lot of the computer choices I made were based upon pure jealousy. A friend or someone I knew had gone and bought something and upgraded. Now I've got 16 meg of RAM, or I've got 32 meg of RAM, and that's it. You sit there and you work for another 3 months, and then you go spend it, and suddenly you go, okay, now I've got 32 meg of RAM. It was a fun time, but I don't think any kids of today would have any concept of the fact that those cards, there was no such thing as plug and play back then. Every card, there were dip switches on the motherboard. If you got them wrong, you had a black screen and you had no idea why. So it was a lot of fun, but at the same time, it is what it is. I actually ran a small hardware consultancy through uni and then slightly after. And one of the tests I would give to someone was I'd give them a PC that was operating, and I'd leave them, and I'd then say, okay, I want you to pull it down, and then go have lunch, and then you can put it back together again. And whilst they were out at lunch, I would change a dip switch and swap a card, so that we'll see how attentive they were. I never had one person hand me back the card going, can I have the original card that was there? I'd paid enough attention to actually work out that it was a different card. But it was a fun time. These days, hardware's a little bit vanilla for my liking. But back then, I started with an XT, had an AT, Pentium 1, Pentium 2. Literally, it was cascade of expenditure that in hindsight was probably a bit silly, but hey, I had a great deal of fun.
It is a fascinating point in history. LGR Clint, our friend, has covered it quite well, and he talks about computers from that age, because all of a sudden the entire world felt they needed to have a PC in the house for the internet, which was just this new thing that everyone needed. And they went from being the price of a second-hand car at the start of the 90s to being, in some cases, free in inverted commas, because you took out your internet subscription and they gave you a free computer. So these things, by the end of the 90s at this point, were so cheap, so ubiquitous. And the wonders of the PC components meant that inside these PCs were the absolute cheapest of parts, the absolute bare minimum required to do what was needed. So you ended up with these devices that cost so very little. As for me, though, I wasn't buying them new then. I was getting recycled office computers, because the upgrade cycle was such that office computers were getting chucked away after 18 months because something else was so much better than it. And I was getting old office computers and doing what I could to upgrade them on the cheap, which was it was good fun. And it was still a few years later, and I think 2003 when I built my first from ground up water-cooled PC with all the bells and whistles. I think my financial position must have changed between 1998 and then. But yeah, this is such an interesting period because we've gone from who would have a computer in the house, only a nerd, to everyone has to have a computer in the house. It's like a microwave, it's like an oven, it's like a Hoover. A vacuum cleaner, sorry.
Everybody should have had a computer in their house because they all were immersed in the computer literacy project. Oh. You guys talk like you invented home computers and everybody else in the world were mouth-breathing barbarians. Well, if Computer Literacy Project was so great, you're still explaining computer buying 15 years later.
The Computer Literacy Project was needed because we were so far behind. We were absolutely in the Stone Age with computers, and the government recognised we needed to get there. So it wasn't so much about the Computer Literacy Project made us world leaders, it made us competent, whereas we had been terrible before.
The truth emerges. Yeah, so 1998, that was the year that I finished up at Northwestern University, started working for real. So at the time, my daily computer was my fully loaded Amiga 4000 Tower, 68060, still underutilized PowerPC board, some kind of cybergraphics board, I don't remember anymore, is what I did all my online writing work, all my online research. Because the production of Amiga games had slowed to a trickle by this time, I did do some game playing on the PC that was in the house. Mentioned my PlayStation and Nomad that I bought in 1998. But yeah, I spent most of my computing time on the Amiga then. Research, like I double checked on this. Yeah, I mean, that would have still, you had online shopping, but you still had the monstrous computer shopper here in the US. I checked out the May 1998 issue, which would coincide with the release date of this video. Still over 700 pages of lovely, lovely, lovely ads and some content, but nobody's reading for the content. It's all about the ads. You were picking on old Dave Green up there, Chris. I mean, obnoxiously patronizing is a style choice. What did strike me, though, in watching through this is that some specs in tech purchasing, I would argue, have actually become less important over time. And the most obvious example is I think that you have to dig these days. If you are somebody who cares about how much RAM your phone has, you got to dig for that info. It is not necessarily, but certainly not by Apple, and I think a number of other manufacturers, like they'll put it on the box or something, but it's not trumpeted as an equal bullet point the way that PCs were sold, 25, 30 years ago. And yeah, you mentioning the hideous solitaire hijinks. It is interesting listening to this, and again, obnoxiously patronizing, but it was true. They're reassuring people, hey, your computer will kind of suck. It will be unstable. It will be crashy. That's not necessarily your fault. You just have to deal with it. And we are less than 5 years away from everything migrating to, the Windows NT kernel in the form of 2000 and XP. We're going to get, Mac OS X. I'm still going to call it OS X, people. You wouldn't or shouldn't have done computer instruction with that kind of blanket disclaimer even a few years after this, but it was valid in 1998.
It's a really good point. And the program does focus on the Windows PC, but it also discusses the alternatives from 1998 market, that being the Apple Mac. And don't laugh, they also mention the Acorns and Amigas. They do point out that you'd spend longer trying to get it started than you would using it, but you'd be part of a niche community. In fact, the exact quote is, on the plus side, you'd be part of a fanatical group of enthusiasts and be able to sneer at people who've just got boring old PCs. I'm not sure where you'd be buying an Amiga in 1998, given even ESCOM closed in 96. Maybe you'd be buying Jason's A4000T off him for $50 and some beers.
But I think that somebody at the BBC was like, you know what? Let's just put this in there because otherwise we're going to get a bunch of obnoxious phone calls. Just drop this in and let's move on.
I agree. Yeah. Absolutely agree. Yeah. Oh, dear. Look, to be fair, back in this period, maybe a little bit before, I did spend many weeks looking at magazines to help me choose a PC, but I wasn't reading up to see what to look for in a PC. I already knew that, but I was looking for the best price. And as it happened, I worked at an IT solutions firm in London at that time, so I just ended up buying a PC at cost from one of our suppliers, which was my Pentium 100. But this TV piece does remind me of a time when actually The market was all over the place, with magazine adverts promising what looked like an absolute bargain until you looked in detail at the spec or you did some background reading on the upgradability and the reliability of that certain brand or product. And mostly those bargains always fell short on something. While on the high street, prices were always slightly elevated against magazines. And again, the package was often not quite what you actually wanted, but annoyingly close. All joking aside, as I watched through this a second time, I did feel the want to just go to the shops and buy a new PC, just for the experience of looking again at the specs and the prices and coming home with a new toy. So while Dave jumps in his Jag to go squeeze a new PC into the boot, I think I'll sit back and read a copy of PC Zone and again ponder if I should buy a PC from Tiny or Gateway, or maybe a compact Presario will look tempting. It's time now for our community question of the week, and last week's question was: design your ideal astounding value retro computer pack-in bundle. One game, one art program, one productivity program for whatever platform you like. What is it? So I've been told in good faith we're out of contest mode. Tony, do you want to read out the top answer?
Yeah, sure. So we've got Colony Activist, who's come back with, if we are going retro, then for the A1200, I would go with UFO Enemy Unknown as my packing game. Almost infinite replayability, and then Deluxe Paint 4. Again, I'm just going to give a nod to that. That was the definitive Amiga drawing program. So I can draw lots of fanfic pictures of my squad getting destroyed by mutants Wordsworth. Then Wordsworth. So I can wire fanfic to go with my pictures and write angry wired letters to Commodore about what they are doing wrong with the Amiga.
And the BBC, if they don't mention the Amiga, yep.
They then provided an alternative, which is a Famicom with Super Mario Bros. 3, a Famicom Family Basic Keyboard with software, so I can wire my own drawings, games, productivity apps, and finally CrossPaint, which is a modern paint package for the Famicom, so I can draw all the Mario and Wario / the world needs.
All right. Robert Crowther gave us a VIC-20 with VIC 1540 floppy drive, a VIC 1110 8K RAM expansion, and dodgy Commodore joystick. Why would you do that to yourself? But the software, the game is Jelly Monsters. Productivity is the VIC Writer word processor. Going to make use of that 8K RAM expansion. And for art, the Micro Deal light pen.
I like the third answer. Dave, go for it.
Well, Jeff Mendoza
Fraud.
says,
I call
Jeff
fraud
Mendoza,
as usual.
My favorite Jeff Mendoza says, Word 97. It's a game. Word 97 Pinball. It's an art program. Clip art. It's a productivity program. You can even have Clippy help you to write a letter. I like Clippy.
Fantastic. AI before we knew we needed it. Oh dear.
I was at a presentation where the Microsoft representative on stage killed Clippy.
I like Clippy.
Showed how to get rid of Clippy from your computer. Poor Clippy.
Nice. There's lots more fantastic answers. It's been a long week, so I don't think we've got time to go through any more. But Jason, what's this week's question?
Yeah. So you are the producer of a new edutainment video about how to buy a computer, just like the 1998 video we featured today. You have an unlimited budget, and you can pair one mainstream celebrity with one retro tech celebrity to host this video. Who are you hiring?
Answers on a postcard to Twitter. Or alternatively, go to the subreddit, This Week in Retro / rubbish, absolutely rubbish. In fact, you can go to thisweekinretro.com.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
There'll be a link. Our link tree will take you to the subreddit. There we go. Accidentally did something good there. Or if you want to go directly to Reddit, it's reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. Tony, thank you very much for joining us this week. We've barely scratched the surface of your history at Melbourne House. Melbourne House, very special to me. This is Lord of the Rings from Melbourne House, or from Beam Software, the sequel to The Hobbit. They went on to do a whole series of games all the way through to the final of the book. I don't know if you haven't mentioned them. I don't know if you ever had any involvement with those, but they're very special to me.
Oh, look, if you got 2 minutes, so there is I was very lucky. One of my very first memories of Melbourne House was there was a PC set up, and It had, anyone remember this stuff? The good old line printed.
Gang. Yeah.
This PC's job was to run a test program against Lord of the Rings. So it actually literally was testing the gameplay itself. And Norton, I'm trying to think of his surname. Let's see if I can dig it out of my notes. Norton Truter. So he was one of the coders on Lord of the Rings. He was showing me a printout. And basically it was a printout of a scene in the game where they're at a fishing hole and there's Gandalf and Bilbo and one other. I think it was Thorin. And this was during the testing phase. And the vicious map entered the clearing. So this was obviously a bug where they'd assigned a inanimate object as an actual NPC that was aggressive. And then the next bit was the vicious map eats Frodo. and then the vicious map exits west. And then because of the actual gameplay sequence that was in there, Gandalf turns to Bilbo and goes, "You should have seen the one that got away." And in my mind, I wish they had a frame that, and I wish it was on a wall somewhere in a museum, because it is just one of those things that it was a bug and it was on paper, and I wish it was still around, because it was just one of those things you go, I'm never going to forget that.
Absolutely amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Tony?
Head on over to Games That Weren't for more information on Arcade Wizzard and other stuff from Tony's archives.
We'll all see you next week.
Beautiful.
Bye.
See ya.
We're all waving.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.